when the night is calm and silence covers the room, when your breathing begins to find its slower rhythm and the body is prepared to surrender itself to the embrace of rest. There is something strangely comforting in letting the mind wander back, 2 ages long past, to times when humanity itself seemed to hesitate on the edge of memory, caught between the glow of what had been and the uncertainty of what was to come. Tonight, as you close your eyes and allow these words to drift gently over you, I will take you to a time often described as the Dark Ages, a stretch of history wrapped in mystery, surrounded by shadows, and whispered about as if it were a chapter. Lost in fog. The Dark Ages. What really happened there? Was it truly an age of silence, of despair, of broken knowledge and fallen grandeur? Or was it something softer, slower, like a long pause between the beating of history's heart? Imagine, for a moment, lying on a quiet hillside at dusk, the horizon fading into tones of deep blue and muted grey, the last golden strands of sunlight slipping away while the air grows cooler and the first stars begin to tremble above. In this half-light you can feel the world changing, not violently, but gently, as day gives way to night. This is how the Dark Ages unfold in the mind, not as a sudden extinguishing of brilliance, but as a slow dimming, a soft curtain drawn between eras. The people who lived then did not think of themselves as dark or fallen. They were simply living, breathing, enduring, planting, dreaming, surviving in ways we cannot always see from the distance of centuries. To us it seems shadowed, but to them it was the only present they knew. The term itself, Dark Ages, carries with it a sense of loss. Historians used it to describe a time when the lights of Rome had faded, when order seemed fractured, when great cities had emptied and libraries had fallen silent. But the darkness was never complete. Flickers of continuity, sparks of resilience, small enclaves of knowledge, and human tenderness carried through those centuries, even when the larger structures crumbled. And as you let these thoughts linger, let them rock you like waves, let them settle upon you like a blanket, you may begin to sense that darkness is not always absence, but sometimes a gentler shade, a slower rhythm, a moment when life turns inward to heal before it rises again. Picture the landscape of Europe as the old empire withdrew. Roads once filled with the tramp of soldiers, now quiet. Stone bridges stretching across calm rivers with no carts rattling across them. Villas with vines crawling up their abandoned walls. The air would have been filled not with silence, but with smaller sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustle of wind across tall grass, the distant voices of farmers calling to oxen as they ploughed. The world was not empty. It was only less grand, less orchestrated, and in that simplicity lay a kind of stillness that to us now feels like mystery. If you wander further in this vision, imagine a small village where smoke rises lazily from wooden huts, where families gather around firelight, telling stories of ancestors, whispering prayers, holding on to fragments of memory from times they only half recall. A worn manuscript, perhaps guarded by monks in a quiet monastery, its ink fading but its words alive with meaning, carried forward through hands that refused to let it die. These were the quiet guardians of light in an age called dark, and without them the memory of the past would have been lost. And so the question arises, what really happened in these so-called Dark Ages? Did knowledge vanish, or did it simply retreat into quieter places, waiting for the right moment to bloom again? As your breathing slows, as the heaviness of sleep approaches, think of the Dark Ages not as an abyss but as twilight, a liminal space between two dawns. The Roman Empire had fallen, but Europe had not ended. It had only changed shape. Fields were still planted, children still laughed, songs were still sung, and hearts still longed for beauty. Even in the shadows, life persisted. The truth, like the rhythm of sleep, is gradual, layered, complex. Historians see famine, war, invasions, and loss. But they also see resilience, adaptation, continuity. Just as the body, after a day of strain, requires stillness to heal, so too did civilization require its long night, its centuries of rest, before it would awaken again to light and motion. The Dark Ages were not merely an ending, but a transition. And transitions are often misunderstood when viewed only from afar. Allow your mind now to drift with this thought, that history, like the tide, moves in and out, rises and falls, not always in brilliance, not always in silence, but in cycles, each necessary to the balance of the whole. As the tide pulls away, it leaves the shore bare, but it always returns, carrying new gifts, new life, new movement. The Dark Ages were such a retreat, a pulling away, so that the later centuries might surge forward once more. And in this gentle rhythm lies your rest. The centuries roll past like clouds across a dim sky, and you do not need to chase them. You need only let them pass over you, bringing quiet, bringing stillness. The Dark Ages are not so frightening when you see them not as catastrophe but as the quiet between breaths. A pause in the song, the silence that makes the next note more powerful, before we drift deeper together into this long-forgotten age. I invite you, softly, to join me in keeping this journey alive. If these calm words, these shadows of the past, bring you a sense of peace as you rest tonight, consider gently liking this video, leaving a quiet comment about what thoughts it stirred in you, sharing it with someone who may also long for stillness, and subscribing so that you may walk with us again into other hidden moments of time. Do this not in haste, but as one more gentle act before surrendering to rest. Now, with the Dark Ages stretching before us like a vast twilight plain, we begin our slow journey, step by step, breath by breath, letting the questions linger, letting the answers wait, as we sink deeper into the mystery of what really happened, when the lights dimmed and the world turned inward. Block 2, the fading of empire. When we think of the long stretch of time we call the Dark Ages, the mind often drifts first to the moment when Rome began to fade, when the vast empire that had once seemed eternal slowly dissolved into silence. To understand this fading, imagine it not as a sudden collapse, but as a gentle erosion. A long twilight in which light gave way to shadow almost imperceptibly, as when the day's brightness drains into dusk and the first stars appear without, you realizing exactly when the sun slipped below the horizon. Rome's end was like that, long, uncertain, almost dreamlike in the way its greatness thinned and dimmed, leaving behind echoes rather than shouts, fragments rather than whole forms, whispers instead of commands. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the empire at its height. Roads stretched like veins across the land, connecting provinces from distant Britain to the deserts of Syria. Along those roads, traders moved with carts heavy with grain and filled with oil and wine, fabrics dyed in brilliant colors. Aqueducts arched gracefully across valleys, carrying water to cities that pulsed with life. The hum of the empire was constant, a steady rhythm of voices, footsteps, and work that never seemed as though it could end. And yet, even in its strength, small fractures appeared, finances strained, armies stretched thin, borders threatened. Slowly, like cracks in stone, these weaknesses widened. Now, let the vision shift. Imagine that same Roman road centuries later. The stones are still there, laid with care by hands long gone, but weeds push through the gaps. The echo of marching feet has faded. Instead, there is only the soft sound of wind, the occasional cry of a bird overhead. Where once carts rattled, and merchants called out prices, there is silence, broken only by the quiet murmur of nature reclaiming space. It is not a violent silence, but a calm one, like the hush of a forest after the storm has passed. The empire did not vanish overnight. It slowly withdrew, leaving these long corridors of stone to be absorbed back into the landscape. The fading of Rome touched everyone differently. For some, in distant provinces, it meant the disappearance of officials who had once collected taxes or organized markets. For others, it meant soldiers leaving forts, leaving towns vulnerable. In cities, it meant fountains running dry when aqueducts broke, or arenas falling into disuse as funds vanished. But for many, especially those in villages and farms, the change was quieter. Fields were still planted, bread was still baked, fires were still lit at dusk. The great web of empire had loosened, but the smaller rhythms of life carried on, pulsing steadily beneath the surface. Think of a grand amphitheater, its stones carefully arranged, its stairways once crowded with spectators cheering at games and performances. Now, grass grows between the stones, goats graze along its edges, and the voices that once thundered within it are gone. The stones remain, but their meaning has shifted. What was once a monument to human triumph has become part of the quiet landscape, enduring but altered, no longer vibrant but still present. This is how the empire lingered, not erased, but transformed, its grandeur softened into the stillness of ruin. If you let your mind wander further, picture a villa on the outskirts of a Roman town, once filled with laughter, with banquets, with guests reclining on couches while music played. It now stands hollow. The roof has collapsed in places, the mosaic floors are weathered by rain, ivy creeps along the walls. Yet perhaps, in one corner, a family has made shelter, keeping a small fire, surviving with what remains. The world shrank, but it did not vanish. People adjusted, quietly, persistently. Historians speak of invasions, the Goths, the Vandals, the Huns pressing against Rome's borders. These were real, and they brought moments of violence and displacement. But if we look more closely, we see not only armies clashing, but ordinary people moving, searching for safety, carrying their belongings, finding new lands to call home. The empire's collapse was not only battles lost, but migrations, adaptations, the slow weaving of new patterns where the old ones had unraveled. And so life became smaller, more local. Instead of goods flowing across continents, people relied on what they could grow or craft nearby. Instead of vast cities with marble forums, they gathered in villages of wood and thatch. Instead of the authority of distant emperors, they looked to local leaders, chieftains, lords, and in many cases to the church, which preserved what fragments of learning and structure it could. In the quiet scriptoria of monasteries, monks copied manuscripts, saving the words of past centuries one page at a time, their pens scratching softly in the candlelight, while outside the wind rustled through darkened fields. Allow yourself to feel this slowing, this shrinking. It is not unlike the way the body settles into rest at the end of the day. The frantic pace quiets, the grand movements ease into smaller rhythms. The world narrows, but does not cease. The fading of Rome was a civilizational exhale, a letting go, preparing for a long night's rest. And as you breathe now, slow and steady, you may sense how the same rhythm moves in youth movement, from activity into stillness, from grandeur into quiet, from empire into village, from day into night. The Dark Ages, then, begin not with sudden catastrophe, but with this gradual retreat. The empire that had given structure and unity dissolved into fragments, and in those fragments, new forms of life emerged. The old order was gone, but seeds of the future rested in the soil, waiting, unseen, for their moment. Just as winter conceals spring, the Dark Ages concealed the beginnings of what would come centuries later. And so, in this fading, there is no need to imagine despair. Instead, imagine a calm, a quieting of the world, a slowing of footsteps, a gentler rhythm of life. The great lights had dimmed, but stars were visible again in the sky, unnoticed before when torches and fires had burned so brightly. In the silence of empire's end, new voices would one day rise. But for now, it was night, and night has its own peace. Let this image linger as you rest. Roads stretching into the distance, empty but enduring. Cities quiet but not forgotten. Villages small but alive, with fires, with laughter, with survival. Rome had faded, but life continued, smaller, slower, quieter. The fading of empire was not an end, but a transition, a long twilight carrying humanity gently into the Dark Ages. Block 3. When cities fell silent, when you let your thoughts drift deeper into the quiet rhythm of the Dark Ages, imagine first the sound of absence. Not a sudden silence, but a gradual one. The way a market that once bustled with shouts and laughter slowly quiets as stalls close, footsteps fade, and the last voices drift away with the dusk. This is what happened to the great cities that Rome had built, those centers of stone and marble that had once echoed with the weight of law, trade, and entertainment. As the empire dissolved, so too did the pulse of its cities, leaving behind wide streets walked by fewer feet, fountains that ran dry, and colonnades that stood tall but empty, their grandeur softened by neglect. Close your eyes and picture one of these cities at its height. Imagine the smell of bread baked fresh in ovens, the clatter of bronze coins passed from hand to hand, the colorful fabrics draped in stalls, the hum of voices in many tongues as merchants bargained and citizens strolled. Children laughed as they chased each other through courtyards, and scholars gathered in shaded colonnades, debating philosophy, their words mingling with the chatter of everyday life. It was a soundscape alive with presence, a symphony of humanity. Now, let the vision fade. The ovens are cold, the coins lie forgotten in the dust, the fabrics hang tattered, their colors dulled by sun and rain. The courtyards are empty, the scholars' voices stilled. The sound of the city is now the whisper of wind through broken arches, the cooing of pigeons nesting where once officials proclaimed decrees. The silence is not total, it is filled with smaller, softer sounds, but it is a silence that speaks of change, of withdrawal, of a life that has shifted away. In this silence, nature returned. Grass grew between stones once polished by countless sandals. Trees pushed their roots through the cracks of temples. Birds nested in amphitheaters, their songs replacing the roar of the crowds. The grandeur of Rome did not vanish, but it softened, became part of the landscape rather than the center of human life. And as you imagine these ruins, imagine also how stillness settles within you, how the fading of noise allows rest to deepen. How the absence of clamor is not frightening but soothing, like the calm that follows a long day. Yet even as cities shrank and emptied, life continued beyond their walls. People gathered in villages, closer to the land, closer to the rhythms of planting and harvest. Instead of the marble colonnades, they lived in wooden halls. Instead of libraries filled with scrolls, they passed stories by the firelight. Instead of theaters with actors, they listened to songs sung under the stars. It was a smaller world, but it was alive, resilient, capable of carrying memory in forms less visible but no less real. Historians sometimes see the silence of the cities as a sign of loss, but perhaps it is also a sign of transformation. For the city is only one form of human life, and when it quiets, other forms rise. In the stillness of the Dark Ages, monasteries began to hum with the quiet scratching of pens as monks copied texts. Farmhouses echoed with lullabies, warriors' halls rang with tales of ancestors, and in these spaces, new cultures grew. The silence of the cities allowed other voices to be heard, softer but enduring. Think of how night falls in your own life. Streets grow quiet, houses darken, but within the silence there is life, families at rest, dreams unfolding, hearts beating. The Dark Ages were much the same. The cities fell silent, but life flowed elsewhere, into smaller spaces, quieter rhythms. Silence is not the end. It is a different kind of song. And so, as your breath steadies and your eyes grow heavy, let yourself walk slowly through those silent streets. Let the broken arches and empty forums be not symbols of despair, but invitations to rest. The stones are cool beneath your feet, the air is soft with evening, and the silence itself cradles you, just as history cradled those who lived through that twilight age. The Dark Ages are not merely about what was lost, but about what shifted. And in the silence of cities, humanity found new ways to endure. As you drift toward sleep, let that silence comfort you, let it soften your thoughts, let it carry you deeper into the long night of history, where even in stillness, life remains. Block 4, the weight of invasions, as you continue to drift through the long twilight of the Dark Ages. Imagine the land itself as a vast stage where movement never truly ceased, even as empires dimmed. Across forests, plains, and rivers, groups of people pressed forward. Families carrying bundles, warriors leading horses, entire tribes seeking new homes. To those who lived through it, these were not invasions in the sense of distant words on parchment. They were the daily reality of strangers arriving, of borders shifting, of uncertainty growing like a storm cloud across the horizon. And yet, if you let the mind slow and soften, you may see it not only as violence and disruption, but also as the quiet reshaping of a continent, the blending of peoples, the weaving of new threads into the fabric of Europe. Picture for a moment the arrival of the Goths, tall and fierce, their wagons rolling slowly across the plains, the creak of wood mingling with the lowing of cattle. Behind them came the Vandals, pressing further, and beyond them the shadow of the Huns, horsemen riding swift and low, their presence like a dark wind sweeping across the steppes. To the Romans, these groups were feared as destroyers, yet to themselves they were seekers of survival, carrying children, elders, and whatever fragments of their past they could save. In this slow-moving tide of humanity, the old boundaries dissolved, and with them the certainty of the empire. Now, imagine a Roman villa along the Rhine, its walls painted with faded colors, its garden once fragrant with herbs. One evening, the family hears the distant thunder of hooves, the faint glimmer of fires on the horizon. Fear rises. but so does resignation. They gather what they can, leaving the rest behind. By morning, the house stands empty, and in time, newcomers will occupy it, altering it, repurposing it, until its origins blur. This is how invasions unfolded, not always in a single night of battle, but in the long waves of movement that transformed what had been familiar into something new. The soundscape of these centuries was not the silence of abandoned cities alone, but also the rumble of migrations, the shifting voices of many languages, the clash of swords, yes, but also the cries of newborns in wagons, the barking of dogs, the songs sung to keep weary travelers awake. It was a noisy time in its own way, though from a distance it seemed shadowed. And as you rest now, imagine those sounds not as chaos, but as the heartbeat of change, steady and inevitable, the rhythm of a world rearranging itself. There were battles, of course. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 echoed like thunder. Across the world, the unimaginable made real as the eternal city was breached. Later came the Vandals, the Lombards, the Saxons crossing seas into Britain. Each moment felt catastrophic to those who endured it, but in the grand sweep of history, these invasions were part of the slow blending that would create medieval Europe. From the union of conquerors and conquered, new kingdoms were born, languages evolved, and traditions fused. What seemed like destruction was also, quietly, creation. And so, as you let these images pass gently across your thoughts, see them, not as sharp, violent flashes, but as long, slow waves rolling across centuries. A tribe arrives, settles, adapts. Another moves on. A city falls, but its stones are reused in farmhouses. A temple is abandoned, but its columns stand in a field where shepherds graze their flocks. Life continues, reshaped, transformed, never erased. Imagine the monastery perched on a hillside, its bells faint in the distance. Outside its walls, the world seems unstable, but within, monks bend over their manuscripts, copying patiently, line by line. Even as invasions shift the land, these small sanctuaries preserve fragments of memory, holding on to words, prayers, and knowledge that might otherwise vanish. The invasions did not destroy everything. They redirected the flow of history, channeling energy away from empire and into the roots of new cultures. Let yourself drift into this thought that even in the weight of invasions, even in the uncertainty of moving peoples and crumbling borders, there was resilience. Fields were still sown. Children still grew. Stories still spread. Change came, but life endured. And as you breathe deeply now, imagine those waves of humanity passing, one after another, until the land itself settled into new shapes, quieter, different, but alive. The Dark Ages, marked by invasions, were not only about what was lost, they were also about what was carried forward, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes imperfectly, but always with persistence. And as you rest, you too carry forward fragments of memory, echoes of the past, woven into the fabric of the present. The invasions were heavy, yes, but out of that weight grew new worlds, waiting, patient, beneath the surface. Block 5, the shadows of forgotten knowledge. Imagine yourself in a quiet room, the walls lit only by the flickering glow of a small oil lamp. On a wooden desk lies a manuscript, its letters carefully inked by a patient hand, its pages filled with the thoughts of men who lived long before. Outside the window, the night stretches endlessly, the air heavy with silence. Inside, The only sound is the soft scratching of a quill against a parchment. The rhythm steady, unhurried, a heartbeat of knowledge being preserved. This is the image that carries us deeper into the Dark Ages, a time often spoken of as the loss of learning, the vanishing of wisdom, the forgetting of what once was known. Yet, as you let yourself sink into this vision, you may see that forgetting is not sudden, nor is it ever complete. It is like mist that thickens slowly, obscuring the distance, but never erasing the ground beneath your feet. The libraries of Rome and Alexandria, the scrolls of philosophers, the records of emperors, many were indeed lost, consumed by fire, neglected in damp corners, or abandoned when cities fell silent. Imagine the vast shelves once filled with knowledge. Astronomical charts, medical treatises, histories of wars, plays and poems, all carefully copied by scribes who believed their words would echo forever. And then imagine the quiet after flames licked those shelves, the ashes floating in the air, the silence that follows destruction. To us, it feels like tragedy, but in the slow rhythm of the Dark Ages, what was lost did not end the story. It simply shifted it into other forms, quieter, less grand, but still alive. Picture the monasteries scattered across Europe, many perched on hillsides, isolated from the turbulence of the world beyond their walls. Within them, monks bent over their desks by candlelight, copying line after line, their eyes weary, their hands cramped, their breaths slow and deliberate. Each word they preserved was a bridge across centuries, carrying fragments of Rome, of Greece, of ancient thought, into a future that might not have existed without their quiet work. These were the guardians of memory in an age called dark, and though the light of learning had dimmed, it had not been extinguished. Now, let your imagination drift further. Think of a village where no books exist, where knowledge is carried not in ink, but in voice. Elders gather by the fire, recounting stories of ancestors, tales of heroes, fragments of myths. Children listen, their eyes wide, their hearts storing what their ears receive. This too is knowledge, though it is not written. It is memory carried through sound, through song, through repetition. When we think of the Dark Ages as forgetting, perhaps we fail to see how much was remembered in other ways, how wisdom adapted to survive. In the silence of forgotten cities, practical skills remained alive. Farmers still knew when to plant, and when to harvest, builders still raised huts and halls. Healers still gathered herbs and whispered remedies. The grand structures of knowledge may have crumbled, but the roots dug deep into the soil of daily life endured. To call it darkness may be to overlook the smaller lights that continued to glow. There is a rhythm here that mirrors your own descent into rest, just as learning shifted from libraries to monasteries, from scrolls to voices, from grandeur to simplicity. So too does your mind shift from wakefulness to sleep. What is lost in clarity becomes richer in dream. What is set aside in the noise of the day becomes alive in the quiet of the night. The Dark Ages were such a dream time for civilization, not devoid of life, but turned inward, hidden, preparing. Historians often speak of decline of fewer texts, fewer schools, fewer great works, but if you pause, you will see continuity as well. In Ireland, monks preserved Latin texts that would one day reignite Europe's learning. In Byzantium, scholars kept alive traditions of Greek philosophy. In the Islamic world, translations of Aristotle and Galen were studied and expanded. The forgetting was never complete. The threads remained, woven across lands and languages, waiting for a time when they could be drawn together again. Let yourself picture this slow weaving, A scribe in a monastery, unaware that his careful copying of a single book will one day influence minds far beyond his imagination. A village elder telling a story to children who will carry it to their own grandchildren. A healer passing down a recipe for a salve that eases pain, never knowing that it preserves fragments of ancient medicine. These are the shadows of forgotten knowledge, not gone, but hidden, softened, waiting. And so, as you rest tonight, allow yourself to feel that same rhythm. The comfort that forgetting is never final, that silence is never complete, that even in the darkest times, small lights remain. The Dark Ages were not an empty void, but a time of transition, of memory kept in fragments, of wisdom hidden in shadows. As you breathe slowly, as your body sinks deeper into stillness, imagine those shadows not as frightening, but as gentle, like the dim light of twilight guiding you into night. Knowledge, like life, endures in many forms. It does not always shout from marble halls. Sometimes it whispers from candlelit rooms. It does not always stand in libraries of stone. Sometimes it walks in the memory of a grandmother's tale. It does not always shine brightly. Sometimes it glows faintly, enough to guide the next step, enough to wait for dawn. And so, in this block of our journey through the Dark Ages, we do not see only loss, but also survival, quiet and steady. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you the comfort that nothing is ever wholly forgotten, that beneath the shadows, memory remains, and that from the quiet work of countless unknown hands, the light of learning would one day return. Block 6. Life in the Villages. As the grand cities of the Roman world grew quiet, and the echoes of empire faded into the distance, the heart of human life retreated into smaller spaces, into clusters of wooden houses, into villages where the rhythm of survival was measured not by the decrees of emperors but by the turning of the seasons. Imagine, in the soft haze of twilight, walking into one of these villages. The paths are narrow and muddy, the air filled with the scent of earth and smoke. Chickens wander between cottages, children run barefoot in the dust, and from a small hut the faint sound of a lullaby drifts into the evening. The empire is gone, the marble forums are silent, but here life beats steadily, quietly, persistently. Close your eyes and picture the homes themselves. Walls of timber, roofs of thatch, smoke curling from a hole where the fire burns at the center. Inside, families gather around the warmth, their faces lit by the flickering light, their stories passed from mouth to mouth. Meals are simple bread baked from barley, stews made from whatever the season offers, perhaps a piece of salted meat, when fortune allows. There is no luxury, but there is continuity, the daily rhythm of survival, the comfort of familiarity. The village is not silent. It hums with smaller sounds, softer than the roar of cities, but no less alive. The lowing of oxen in the fields, the crack of an axe splitting wood, the creak of a cart's wheels as it moves slowly along a rutted track, the laughter of children at play, the rustle of wind through fields of wheat. At dawn, the rooster's crow wakes the people. At dusk, the tolling of a simple bell or the fading light sends them back to rest. These sounds form a kind of music, unplanned, unpretentious, yet deeply human. Life here is fragile, yet resilient. Winters are harsh, and food may run scarce. Disease can sweep through huts where many sleep close together. Raids or conflicts may bring sudden fear. And yet each spring, seeds are planted, fields tilled, and hope renewed. The people of these villages did not see themselves as living in darkness. They saw themselves as living as best they could, close to the land, sustained by what their hands could make and what their fields could yield. Imagine, as you drift deeper into this vision, the fields themselves. Rows of grain bending in the wind, patches of beans and peas, orchards bearing fruit. Shepherds watch over flocks, their dogs circling restlessly. At harvest time, the entire village gathers, scythes swinging, laughter mixing with the sweat of labor. The work is hard, but the reward is shared. Bread baked fresh, ale brewed and poured, songs rising into the night as the season's bounty is celebrated. These are the moments of joy in a world often seen from afar as bleak. And in the quiet of winter, when snow covers the earth and the fields lie bare, families huddle close to the fire. Outside, the world seems still, but inside, stories flow. Tales of saints, of spirits, of heroes and battles long ago. Children listen wide-eyed, their imaginations carrying them beyond the small walls of their huts, into realms of wonder. This oral tradition kept memory alive, shaping the imagination of future generations, weaving threads that would one day form the rich tapestry of medieval myth and legend. There is something deeply soothing in this image, life reduced to its essentials, stripped of grandeur but rich in intimacy. No colonnades, no aqueducts, no marble statues, only the rhythms of earth, fire, and voice. And as you breathe slowly, you may feel how this simplicity mirrors your own descent into rest. The noise of the day fades, the complexity of thought dissolves, and what remains are the simple rhythms of breath and heartbeat, the essentials of being. Historians often describe these villages as poor, primitive, fragile, but from within they were worlds of meaning, of connection, of survival. They were places where children grew, where songs were sung, where seasons shaped the flow of time. And if you let yourself sink into this thought, you may find comfort in the idea that even when empires fall, life persists in small, tender forms. Picture again the village at dusk. Smoke rises slowly into the evening sky, blending with the fading light. A dog barks in the distance, then grows quiet. Families finish their meals, voices drop, and one by one, doors close. The village falls into darkness, not fearful, but restful, ready for another day. And in this silence, you too may feel your body prepare for rest, the same cycle that has sustained humanity for centuries. The Dark Ages, seen from the vantage of grand history, may seem like shadows. But in the villages, life glowed steadily, like the embers of a fire that never truly went out. It was smaller, yes, but it was alive, and in its quiet resilience, it carried forward the human story through the long night of history. Block 7 Faith, in the shadows, as the centuries of the Dark Ages unfolded. When empires were fading and cities fell into silence, one force remained constant, weaving itself gently through villages, across valleys, and into the hearts of people who sought stability in uncertain times. That force was faith. In a world stripped of the grandeur of empire, where knowledge seemed fragile and life precarious, belief in the divine offered a sense of order, of meaning, of comfort. And as you sink deeper into this journey, let your imagination carry you into the candlelit interior of a small wooden church, where voices rise softly in prayer, where the smell of wax and incense mingles with the damp scent of old timber, and where, even in the dimness, there is a glow of peace. Picture the monasteries again, perched on lonely hillsides or hidden in valleys. Their stone walls stood as refuges, their bells tolling across fields, their cloisters echoing with the steady rhythm of footsteps and whispered prayers. Within them, monks rose before dawn, their breath visible in the cold air, gathering to chant psalms that had been sung for centuries. The sound was not loud, not triumphant, but steady, calming, like the murmur of a river flowing through the night. It reminded all who heard it that even as kingdoms rose and fell, the voice of faith endured. In these monasteries, work and prayer were inseparable. The monks tended gardens, growing herbs for healing, wheat for bread, grapes for wine. They cared for the sick, taught the young, and most importantly, copied manuscripts, preserving the words of scripture and fragments of ancient learning. Imagine the patient hand, the slow curve of each letter, the quiet concentration, the long hours by flickering lamplight. Each stroke of the pen was an act of devotion, a bridge across centuries. Without these hands, so much might have been lost. With them, memory survived. Beyond the monasteries, in the villages, faith was simpler, woven into the rhythms of daily life. At dawn, a prayer before the fields were sown. At dusk, a hymn sung softly by the fire. On holy days, bells called people together, their voices, rising in unison, blending into one sound that carried across the fields. Churches were small, often built of wood or simple stone, yet within them people found shelter from the storms of uncertainty. The flicker of a candle, the image of a cross, the murmur of a priest's words, these became anchors in a world where much else was shifting. Imagine the pilgrimages that began to stir in these centuries. Men and women, young and old, walking, mile after mile across dirt roads, seeking shrines, holy relics, places said to hold healing power. Their steps were slow, their burdens heavy, yet their hearts were lifted by belief. Along the way, they found hospitality in monasteries or in the homes of strangers, each step a reminder that faith connected them to something larger than themselves. And faith did not only comfort, it also shaped imagination. Stories of saints and martyrs spread across Europe, told by firelight, written into manuscripts, painted onto church walls. These tales reminded people that holiness could shine even in times of darkness, that sacrifice and love could endure even when kingdoms failed. A mother told her child the story of Saint Martin sharing his cloak, and the child learned that generosity was greater than wealth. A farmer heard of Saint Benedict's rule and found that discipline and prayer could bring order to life. These stories, humble as they seemed, wove threads of continuity through the centuries. Now let your thoughts drift to the great cathedrals that would rise centuries later. Their soaring arches, their stained glass windows, their music filling. Vast spaces, all of these were possible because, in the so-called Dark Ages, faith endured in smaller, quieter forms. The seeds of grandeur were sown in the shadows, nurtured by the whispers of monks, by the prayers of villagers, by the steady toll of bells in lonely valleys. Faith also offered explanations when the world seemed uncertain. When famine struck, people turned to prayer. When storms raged, they sought meaning in divine will. When disease swept through villages, they lit candles, carried relics, and hoped for protection. In a time when science was fragile, faith was the lens through which they understood their world. It was not ignorance, but a framework of meaning, a way to hold the unexplainable with reverence rather than despair. And as you let your breathing deepen, you may feel the same comfort that they felt, the thought that there is order even when it is unseen, the sense that light endures even when shadows are long. The rhythm of prayer, steady and calm, like the beating of your heart, like the rise and fall of your chest as you rest. Faith in the Dark Ages was not a blaze of glory. It was a candle in the night, small, steady, flickering, but enduring. It guided people through uncertainty, preserved memory, and sowed seeds of renewal. And as you drift closer to sleep, let that candlelight guide you to not blinding, not overwhelming, but soft, calming, carrying you gently deeper into the quiet of rest, just as it carried humanity through the long night of history. Block 8. The quiet work of time, as the centuries drifted forward and the Dark Ages stretched on. One of the most striking realities of this era was not only what happened in the loud moments of battle or the dramatic falls of kingdoms, but what unfolded slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, beneath the surface. Time itself became a patient sculptor, shaping the world not with sudden chisels, but with the long, steady strokes of erosion, growth, decay, and renewal. Imagine standing before the ruins of a Roman bathhouse, its walls cracked, its once pools now filled with rainwater and reeds. Day by day, wind carried dust into its corners, rain smoothed its edges, vines crept along its stones. No single moment defined its ruin. It was the slow work of time, persistent and silent. Close your eyes and picture an old road, one of the great Roman highways that once connected the empire. At its height, it echoed with the steady march of legions, the rattle of carts, the voices of merchants. Now, centuries later, the stones are uneven, broken in places, weeds growing where footsteps once fell. Yet still, travelers use it, peasants walking to market, pilgrims heading to a shrine, shepherds guiding their flocks. The road endures, altered, softened, less grand but still alive. It is a reminder that time does not erase everything. It transforms, blending the old into the new. In villages, houses of timber decayed, roofs sagging with age, but beside them new huts rose, built with the same hands that worked the fields. Fields themselves changed, rotating from grain to pasture, their boundaries shifting with the needs of families. Rivers altered their courses, cutting new paths across the land, leaving old ones dry. Forests that had been cut back during Rome's expansion slowly reclaimed ground, trees spreading into places where once there were villas. In all of this, time worked steadily, unnoticed, shaping a new world out of the remnants of the old. Think, too, of memory itself, how it changes with time. A child hears a story from a grandparent who heard it long ago from their own elders. The details blur, the edges soften, but the heart remains. Over centuries, myths were shaped this way. Legends of ancient heroes became less about exact events and more about timeless truths, sacrifice, loyalty. What historians might call distortion, ordinary people experienced as the natural work of memory, a way of keeping the past alive, even as its details slipped away. The quiet work of time is not only decay, but also healing. After wars ended, fields grew green again. After villages burned, new ones rose nearby. After storms toppled trees, new saplings sprouted. The Dark Ages may seem to us like an age of loss, but for those who lived through them, it was also an age of renewal, where life continued, slower, quieter, but unbroken. Imagine the earth itself breathing through these centuries, exhaling ruins, inhaling forests, exhaling silence, inhaling voices. The rhythm is gentle, like your own breath now as it steadies into calm. Within monasteries, time was measured not in centuries, but in hours of prayer. Bells marked the passing of each moment, drawing monks to chant, to work, to copy, to reflect. Their days unfolded in cycles, each one blending into the next, until lifetimes became threads in the longer fabric of history. Their patience mirrored the patience of time itself, its feet planted, a seed planted, each chant a breath woven into eternity. And so, even as the larger world shifted, time within those walls felt steady, sacred, unchanging. Allow yourself to imagine how the passing of centuries must have felt to those who lived only brief lives within them. A farmer saw his field grow from spring to harvest, his children rise from infancy to adulthood, his hair grey as seasons circled. He did not see the centuries, only his small portion of them. And yet, when countless such lives are placed together, they form the long sweep we call the Dark Ages. The great changes were not experienced as sudden. They were lived in small increments, like the ticking of a slow clock that marks not hours, but ages. This is the essence of the quiet work of time. It is not loud, not immediate, but relentless. It reshapes stones, forests, rivers, memories. It heals, it erodes, it transforms. And as you lie here listening, you too feel its touch. Each breath is a moment passing, each heartbeat a marker of time's rhythm. Slowly, steadily, without you noticing, time carries you toward rest, just as it carried civilizations through their long night. So let yourself rest in this thought, that time, though often unseen, is always working. It does not rush, it does not falter. It wears down empires, it lifts up villages, it preserves seeds for new dawns. The Dark Ages were not frozen. They were flowing with time, shaping, preparing, waiting. And as you drift deeper into sleep, allow yourself to be carried by that same current, calm, steady, gentle, into the quiet that holds you. Block 10. The silence of night when the sun slipped below the horizon in the Dark Ages. When the last glimmers of light gave way to darkness, the world changed in ways we can barely imagine today. For people who lived without lamps of glass, without electricity, without the constant glow that now stretches across our nights, the coming of evening was profound. It was not simply the end of labor. It was the arrival of silence, of mystery, of vulnerability, and of awe. And as you rest now, in the calm of your own night, imagine yourself walking slowly into their world, where the dark was not something to be pushed back, but something to be accepted, embraced, and lived within. Picture a small village after dusk. Smoke still rises from the chimneys of huts, glowing faintly in the fading light. A dog barks once, then quiets. Families finish their meals, stews thick with barley, bread baked earlier in the davin. The fires are banked low. Outside, the pathways grow empty. There are no lanterns, no bustling streets, no glow from distant windows, only the stars. Above, brighter than we can ever see them now, filling the sky with endless points of light, the moon casting its silver reflection across fields and rivers. To the people of the Dark Ages, the night sky was vast and overwhelming, a tapestry of mystery that stretched beyond comprehension. The silence of night was not total, but it was deep. The creak of wood as a house settled, the cry of an infant, the murmur of a lullaby, the rustle of animals in their pens, the howl of wolves in the distant forest, all of these were sounds that reminded people of their smallness, of the fragility of their existence, and yet also of their place within a larger rhythm. The night was at once threatening and sacred, fearful and calming. To lie in bed, wrapped in rough wool, listening to the breath of family members nearby was to surrender to the unknown, trusting that dawn would return. For many, night was a time of prayer. Before sleep, villagers crossed themselves, whispered blessings for safety, and hoped that angels would watch over their dreams. Monks, following the hours of their order, rose even in the middle of the night to chant psalms in dark chapels, lit only by a few candles. Imagine the sound, low voices rising and falling in unison, echoing in stone halls, merging with the silence outside. Those chants became the heartbeat of the night, carrying on when all else was still. Night also held stories. Families gathered around the dim glow of embers, told tales of saints and heroes, of spirits that wandered in the dark, of miracles and warnings. These stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons, shaping the fears and hopes of each generation. A child, drifting into sleep, listened to a tale of light overcoming shadow, of good triumphing over evil, and carried that story into dreams. In this way, the silence of night became not emptiness, but fullness, a canvas for imagination. The dangers were real, of course. Without light, traveling was perilous. Forest paths became places of unseen threats. Wild animals lurked, and bandits sometimes took advantage of the dark. Storms could sweep through, tearing roofs, flooding rivers, bringing fear to small villages that had little protection. And yet, the people endured, finding comfort in closeness, in community, in faith. The very act of surviving each night deepened their resilience. As you rest now, imagine lying in one of those wooden huts. The air is cool, the blanket heavy, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the wind moves through the trees, and above, the stars are scattered endlessly. You feel small beneath their light, but you also feel part of something vast, timeless, eternal. The silence presses close, not as a threat, but as a cradle, holding you in its vast embrace. Your breath slows, your thoughts fade, and you surrender to the rhythm that has carried humanity through countless nights before. In the Dark Ages, the silence of night was both a challenge and a gift. It stripped away distractions, leaving only the essential, the warmth of the fire, the closeness of family, the comfort of faith, the mystery of the heavens. And as you drift deeper into your own rest, let that same silence hold you. Let it soften your thoughts, ease your body, and carry you gently into sleep, just as it carried them through the long centuries of the night. Block 11, echoes of legends as centuries passed through the long night of the Dark Ages, when written words were scarce and libraries stood half empty. Another kind of memory endured, carried not by parchment but by voices, not by ink but by breath. These were the stories told by firelight, the legends whispered in halls, the myths recited in villages where children leaned close to listen, their eyes wide in the dim glow of embers. In a world without constant noise, without the distractions of endless information, the spoken tale was more than entertainment. It was memory itself, a way of keeping the past alive when so much else seemed to fade. And as you let yourself sink deeper into calm, imagine those voices, soft yet steady, carrying echoes across the centuries, shaping how people dreamed, how they hoped, how they endured. Picture a great hall in the north, timbered and warm against the winter outside. Warriors sit together, their cloaks heavy, their hands wrapped around cups of ale. A bard begins to sing of heroes, of battles, of honor and loss. His words rise and fall like waves, weaving images of gods and monsters, of kings and betrayals. The men listen, their faces lit by the fire, their hearts stirred by memory and imagination. These stories were not written in books. They were carried in rhythm, in rhyme, in melody, and passed from one voice to another. In this way, legends outlived the fall of cities, becoming stronger for being spoken, reshaped each time but never forgotten. Now shift your vision to a small village, far from halls of warriors. A grandmother sits by the hearth, children gathered at her feet. She tells them of saints who healed the sick, of miracles that brought light in times of darkness, of spirits who wandered the forests at night. The children listen, their breathing slow, their dreams beginning even before their eyes close. These tales were guides, teaching caution, hope, reverence, courage. They reminded the young that even in uncertainty, they were part of a larger story, a thread woven into the fabric of time. Legends served more than memory. They served as bridges. In their verses, fragments of older worlds survived echoes of Rome, whispers of Greece, remnants of Celtic myth, Norse sagas, Germanic songs. As they blended, new cultures were born. The Dark Ages were not silent. They were alive with voices carrying the weight of many traditions, reshaping them into something enduring. The Arthurian legends, the tales of Beowulf, the songs of wandering. Minstrels, all of these grew from the soil of this time, nurtured by centuries of retelling. Imagine lying in bed in a hut on a winter's night, the wind howling outside, the fire dim. Your father tells you of a knight who once defended the weak, of a maiden who saw visions of angels, of a beast defeated by courage and faith. These images sink into your mind, shaping your dreams. And tomorrow, when you tell your friend what you heard, you add a detail, a twist, a new turn. The story grows, changes, but continues. This is how legends lived in the Dark Ages, not fixed, but flowing, alive, always moving from one generation to the next. As you breathe slowly now, think of your own life, how memory works, not in perfect detail, but in impressions, in feelings, in fragments carried forward. This was how the Dark Ages remembered themselves, through impressions, through the warmth of shared voices, through the cadence of songs that outlasted the silence of books. Legends filled the gaps where history was lost, and in doing so, they gave meaning to centuries that might otherwise seem empty. The echo of legends was, in its own way, as important as stone walls or written words. It gave identity to peoples, continuity to generations, hope to those who struggled. And as you drift deeper into rest, let those echoes carry you too. Imagine voices rising in halls, in huts, in cloisters, weaving tales that never die. The Dark Ages may seem shadowed, but in those shadows, stories glowed, like embers keeping the fire alive through the longest night. Block 12. The weight of silence. There is a kind of silence that is empty, cold, and frightening. And there is another kind of silence that is full, heavy, and alive with meaning. The silence of the Dark Ages was of the second kind. When we speak of this time as dark, we often imagine absence, the absence of knowledge, the absence of order, the absence of grandeur. And yet, when you look more closely, what filled these centuries was not emptiness, but density, a silence so thick that it became part of life itself. Tonight, as you drift further into calm, imagine that silence, not as something to fear, but as something to rest in, as the people of those times once did. Picture a Roman forum centuries after the empire had faded. The marble columns still stand, but they are cracked, their carvings worn smooth by rain. No merchants fill the square, no judges declare laws, no poets recite verses. The space is quiet, filled only with the hum of insects, the rustle of grass growing between stones, the soft cooing of doves perched high above. To us, it seems like ruin, but to those who lived nearby, it was simply part of their world, a reminder of what had been, a background to their smaller, steady lives. The silence of the forum did not crush them. It became part of the air they breathed. Now imagine a monastery high on a hill, its walls built of stone carried by many hands, its cloisters echoing not with noise, but with the sound of soft footsteps and whispered prayer. Within its scriptorium, monks worked hour after hour in silence, broken only by the scratch of quills and the faint creak of chairs. This silence was not emptiness, was concentration, devotion, and offering. Each pause between words was as meaningful as the words themselves. To live in this silence was to feel the presence of eternity pressing gently on each moment. The silence of the countryside was different still. Far from cities, the nights were vast, the stars overwhelming, the sounds of nature sharp in their clarity. The cry of an owl, the rush of a river, the wind in the trees were not drowned out by anything else. People living in wooden huts, gathered around small fires, listened to these sounds as part of their world. Silence here was never absolute. It was always laced with the voice of the earth, reminding them that they were small but held, fragile but part of something greater. For many, silence was sacred. In churches, the pauses between prayers mattered as much as the prayers themselves. In moments of grief, silence carried mourning. In times of joy, silence carried awe. The absence of noise allowed presence to be felt more deeply. This was a silence that taught patience, that invited reflection, that gave space for dreams to grow. As you lie here now, breathing slowly, feel that same silence surrounding you. It is not empty, it is full of life. The tick of a clock, the hum of the air, the rhythm of your breath, all of these are small notes within a larger stillness. The people of the Dark Ages knew this silence well. They lived with it daily, not as a void, but as a companion. It was the background of their lives, the canvas on which everything else was painted. And in that silence, there was also resilience. Fields lay quiet after harvest, waiting for spring. Families sat in quiet after meals, listening to the crackle of fire. Travelers walked for hours without speaking, hearing only the sound of their steps. These moments were not barren. They were full of presence, of connection to time and place. Silence allowed people to feel the rhythm of life itself. The weight of silence in the Dark Ages shaped memory, imagination, and even faith. It slowed the pace of thought, encouraged stillness, and gave depth to words when they finally came. And as you drift now into your own rest, allow yourself to enter that same silence. Let it press gently around you, not as emptiness, but as fullness, as comfort, as rest. The silence of the Dark Ages was not dark, it was deep. And in its depth, humanity endured, waiting for the dawn that always follows night. Block 13. The Hands That Rebuilt. There is a quiet moment in every long night when the mind stops replaying what was lost and begins, almost without noticing, to imagine what might be made again. And in the centuries we call the Dark Ages, that moment arrived not with trumpets or proclamations, but with hands. With the slow patience of hands that learned how to mend, how to weave, how to set one stone upon another and then another until a wall took shape where only wind had moved before. And as you let your breathing lengthen and soften, you can picture those hands, calloused, steady, unhurried working by the glow of embers at dawn, working beneath the quiet spread of afternoon light, working after sunset when only a small flame guided thread through cloth and vision through intention. Hands that belonged to people who were not heroes in any tale, yet who remade the world inch by inch, stitch by stitch, gesture by gesture, until the long night itself began to hum with the faint music of renewal. Imagine a wooden bench beside a cottage door, smooth where countless palms have rested, and upon it a basket of flax fibers waiting to be teased into strands. The spinner drawing them out with a measured pull, then feeding them to the spindle, where they twist into a thread that holds, because it turns, because the turning itself gives strength, because motion properly paced becomes form, and the wheel keeps circling, circling, a soft whir like a breath, and the thread gathers, and later the loom will take this thread, and the weaver will lift the heddle, and pass the shuttle, and beat the weft, and lift and pass, and beat until the cloth grows long, and the pattern, though simple, repeats enough to soothe the eyes of anyone who watches, and the cloth becomes a tunic for a child, a blanket for a bed, a sail for a riverboat, a sack strong enough to carry grain through mud and rain and time. Listen to iron meeting iron in a small forge at the edge of the village, a bellows breathing air into coals until they glow like small stars resting on the earth. And within that light, the blacksmith draws a bar to the anvil and shapes it with a rhythm that is all pulse and patience, the hammer rising and falling like the tide of a heart, flattening, curving, sharpening, cooling, returning to the fire and back to the anvil again, until a plowshare emerges, a hinge that will not fail a door, a knife that will cut cleanly and be sharpened for years, a nail so modest and yet so necessary that a roof can hold through winter winds because of it. And in this choreography of flame and metal there is no audience, there is only need, gently answered by skill. And the answering itself is the beginning of dawn, though night still lingers around the eaves walk to the river where a millstone turns with the weight of water, each rotation grinding grain into flour, the air white with a softness that settles on skin and hair and lashes. And it is not a miracle, and yet it is, because to take a harvest and make it into bread before hunger arrives is a miracle repeated quietly each day. And the miller knows how the current must be guided, how the sluice must open just enough, how the gears must be greased and the stones dressed. And his knowledge is a map drawn not on parchment, but in muscle memory, in listening, in noticing which creak means care is needed and which hum means all is well. And because of that attention, the village eats, and because the village eats, the children grow. And because the children grow, the future has something to stand on besides hope. In a corner of a yard, a pot is turning on a wheel that the potter spins with a foot steady as a pendulum, and wet clay climbs under the pressure of thumbs and palm. A cylinder becoming a bowl, a lip flaring out like a quiet wave, the slip smooth, the mind even smoother. And when the pot is lifted and trimmed and set to dry, it looks so ordinary that it might be overlooked, yet it will hold water, hold soup, hold herbs, hold the first blackberries of summer, hold the last apples of autumn, hold a candle in winter. And in holding it becomes a vessel not only for things, but for time, a container for the seasons passing, the proof that usefulness wears a humble face, and that humility, in patient repetition, can rebuild more surely than any decree. Hear the faint rasp of wood on wood where a carpenter shapes a beam for a roof frame, the scent of resin rising like a forest remembered, curls of shavings collecting at his feet like pale feathers, and adze making a surface true, a mortise waiting for its tenon, a joint fitted not by force but by understanding, and when two beams meet and hold, and the rafters spread like open hands, and the thatch is laid thick, and the first rain runs off instead of in, there is a kind of blessing that passes through everyone who steps inside, a sense that shelter is not only walls and roof, but the knowledge embodied in them. Knowledge learned from elders and neighbors, and trial and patient correction. Knowledge that survived the unmaking and returned in a shape rightly scaled to the world that now existed. Move among the gardens fenced with woven willow, where cabbages and leeks grow in careful rows, where herbs line the edge of sage and thyme and mintand. A woman pinches leaves to dry above the hearth for winter stews, and a child learns which plants soothe a fever and which should never be touched, and this learning is not held in books but in afternoons like this one, in fingertips stained green, in the humility of listening to those who listened before. And so medicine persists in simple forms, and healing arrives not as spectacle, but as a cup of bitter tea at the right hour, a poultice applied with a prayer, a rest taken instead of a day's labor. And because these small practices endure, more lives endure, and the night loosens its grip a little, see the path that leads from one village to the next, not paved, not straight, but present, worn into the earth by feet that carried bread and news and help. And along this path a peddler walks with a pack, not heavy with luxury, but with useful things near doors, salt, a small mirror, a length of ribbon colored like the inside of a plumband. He trades, and he listens, and he carries stories as surely as goods, and slowly these paths become threads, and the threads become cords, and the cords become a fabric that holds communities together. And trade, which once roared like a river through marble cities, now whispers through hedgerows and over stiles, and the whisper is enough, because steadiness is the mother of plenty. Enter a small church where the roof beams are dark with smoke, and the windows are simple openings the wind can cross. And on a table that serves as altar, a candlestick has been hammered from scrap, and a cloth has been woven by the same hands that kneaded yesterday's bread. And the chalice is pottery rather than silver, and yet the hush is real, the kneeling honest, the blessing felt as warmth along the spine. And after the service, neighbors stay to repair a fence, to share seed, to promise help when the lambing begins. And the sacred is not separate from the daily work, but braided with it, and that braid is strong enough to pull a cart from a ditch, to lift a beam into place, to hold a family through an illness, and the strength of that braid is part of how the dark yields, not vanquished, but transformed into a shade where stars can be seen in the margins of a monastery's day. After the hours of prayer and the careful copying of a page, a monk walks to the garden where espaliered fruit trees stretch along a warmed wall, and he ties a new branch with care so it will grow in a way that bears more generously. And this, too, is rebuilding, because abundance is a form of architecture, and orchards are cathedrals that bloom each spring. And the bees that move from flower to flower sing a liturgy older than any language, and honey gathered in autumn becomes medicine, and sweetness across a winter that might otherwise be all starch and salt. And in such sweetness, hope keeps its color. Consider the quiet invention that happens when necessity keeps company with patience. A better yoke for oxen so their shoulders do not bleed. A stronger fishing was set where the river narrows, a finer sieve woven from reeds, a clay tile fired harder, a shutter that keeps the worst of the weather out. And none of these changes claims the title New Era. None of them writes a date in a chronicle, but taken together, gently, stubbornly, faithfully, they make a life less precarious. They make time feel less like a cliff, and more like a slope. One can climb with steady steps, and that slope leads, not to marble courts, but to mornings where the first thought is not fear. Sit with the bookbinder who takes a stack of vellum sheets and pricks them carefully for sewing, who threads his needle with linen and draws it through in a pattern that will not fail, who glues a spine and presses boards and covers them with leather that will take a century well. And the book he makes may be a psalter or a book of hours or a small compilation of remedies and planting dates. But whatever it is will last. And lasting is another word for building when building must begin not with towers but with pages. Because thoughts must have homes if they are to travel safely, and homes for thoughts are what books are, even when their words are few stand beside a stream where women kneel to wash wool, lifting it, pressing it, rinsing it until the water runs clear. And then they card it and spin it and full it and lay it in sun that has crossed countless fields to arrive here warm on their wrists. And all this work will become cloaks that keep out rain, leggings that keep in warmth, blankets that keep babies sleeping when winds moan, and the work is unremarkable while it happens, and indispensable once it is done. And such is the essence of rebuilding, that it disguises itself as the everyday until the everyday is sturdy enough to be called a world again. Watch a mason learn the language of stone, how it wants to be split, how it sits most happily, how to bed it so frost will not pry it loose in February, and as he lays a course around a well, the wall grows high enough that children can lean across safely to draw water, and the rope can swing without fraying where it rubs, and the splash that once ruined buckets now returns to the well's depths where it belongs, and one small well-made well becomes a center for a hamlet, and around it benches are set, and near it an elder tells a story, and beside it wild mint grows where a few drops flee the dipping. And this is a kind of civilization that doesn't demand attention and therefore lasts here. The beekeeper lift the lid of a skep and hum softly to keep calm what is already calm. The bees a golden cloud that does not rush unless rushed, their combs lit from behind like amber windows. And he takes only what can be spared and leaves what must be left. And such restraint is also a tool, as necessary as any hammer. And through it the hives endure, and the orchards give, and wax makes light, and polish, and seal, and honey teaches. That sweetness is strongest when it is shared. Walk a little farther, and see a teacher under a tree drawing letters and dust with a stick, while a handful of children watch and copy. And perhaps they will not learn many words, perhaps only the ones needed to read a prayer or tally a sack of grain. But even so, the line drawn between sound and symbol is a bridge. And even short bridges matter, because they shorten crossings that would otherwise be forded poorly. And one boy will remember these marks long after the dust has been blown away. And in a winter of his 30th year he will scratch them with a nail on a plank to label what is stored and why. And food will be found rather than forgotten when the storm closes roads, and such small literacy keeps a household from hunger. And hunger prevented is a wall as strong as any city's. Now let evening come again, and let the village look from above like a circle of embers under a dark bowl of sky, every ember a hearth, every hearth a center, and from each center a sphere of care. And the spheres touch and overlap until community is not a word but a warmth that can be felt when a door opens and lamplight falls across a threshold and a voice says, "Come in." And because people keep saying, "Come in," the night is less cold and fear less large. And because fear is less large, the heart has room for making. And because there is room for making, the world, though modest, increases in all of this, the weaving and the forging, the grinding and the planting, the carving and the binding. There is a single thread running, that the future is built when attention is paid to what is near, when care is given to what is held, when time is honored not as an enemy to be outrun, but as a partner that lends its steadying hand in exchange for patience. And while chroniclers may not write these days in gilded letters, the earth remembers them in fields that do not erode, in roofs that do not leak, in tools that serve a long time, in children who sleep through storms and wake to bread. And as you drift now toward your own sleep, you can feel that same partnership with time, that same slow agreement between breath and body, between intention and rest. And it is enough so, the dark ages, which from far away appear as shadow and uncertainty, from within were a workshop, and the masters of that workshop were not kings, but neighbors, not armies but families, not edicts but the steady courage of repetition. And in that workshop the world learned to be small in a way that made greatness possible again. And the proof of that lesson is the simple fact that morning kept arriving, that winter did not cancel spring, that after a harvest there was flour, and after flour bread, and after bread a strength that could lift the next beam. And if you listen closely you can still hear the sound of those hands in your own quiet room, the wheel's soft purr, the anvil's calm ring, the whisper of thread drawn through cloths, guiding you not to wakefulness but to peace, because making and resting are siblings, and the night welcomes both when they come humbly and stay only as long as needed. Block 14. The long waiting there is a kind of patience that is not a choice, but a necessity. And in the centuries we call the Dark Ages, humanity lived inside that patience every single day. It was not the kind of waiting we know now, where hours are marked by the hands of clocks and days are counted by calendars pinned to walls. It was a waiting that stretched like a season, like a field left fallow until the soil could breathe. Again, a waiting so vast that no single person could see its end, but each could feel its presence, steady and immovable. Tonight, as you lie back and let your breath slow, imagine that waiting, not heavy but enveloping, a cloak drawn gently around the shoulders of a people who learned to endure through stillness as much as through action. Think first of the waiting, bound to the earth itself. Seeds pressed into furrows in spring did not sprout overnight. They lay in the soil unseen, swelling slowly with the moisture of rains, trembling under the warmth of the sun until tiny green blades pierced the surface. For weeks, for months, the farmer could do little but trust weed, water, hope, and wait. Harvest was always a season away, a promise just beyond the present moment. The entire village lived within that span of waiting, measuring life by the patience of the earth. Hunger often came before harvest, and still they waited, knowing that bread would return when the fields allowed. Waiting also lived in the rebuilding of trust after chaos, when invaders had passed, when fires had scarred villages, when fear had thinned communities. People rebuilt slowly, one gesture at a time. A roof was repaired, a well was cleared, a fence was mended, but confidence took longer. Neighbors had to wait for safety to settle again, for trade to return, for families to heal from grief. Each act of kindness was like a seed, and time itself watered those seeds. Waiting was not passive. It was the soil in which resilience grew. Now imagine the waiting of knowledge. In monasteries, monks copied texts line by line, knowing that the book would not be finished in a day or even a year. Each page took weeks, each manuscript months, sometimes decades. The work was long, but it was steady, and the waiting became part of devotion. They would never see all the fruits of their labor, but they trusted that generations to come would. For them, waiting was a prayer stretched over years, a rhythm of ink and silence that carried memory forward. There was also the waiting for light in the depth of winter. The nights grew long, the days short, the air sharp with cold. Families huddled by fires, wood stacked carefully, food rationed cautiously. They waited for the thaw, for the first signs of green, for the return of warmth. Winter did not end because anyone willed it. It ended because time itself moved, because the earth turned, because the sun in its patience circled back, and every time spring returned. The waiting was hard, but it was never endless. Legends too were shaped by waiting. Tales of a king who would return, of a savior who would rise, of an age of light that lay ahead. These stories gave shape to patience, filling silence with hope. People told them again and again, not because the return came, but because the act of telling made the waiting bearable. In a sense, the legends themselves were forms of waiting given voice. And if you let yourself listen closely now, you may feel the same rhythm of waiting in your own body. Each breath is a pause between one heartbeat and the next. Sleep itself is a form of waiting, a surrender to silence until morning comes. The people of the Dark Ages knew this rhythm deeply. Their lives were not a rush forward, but a dwelling in cycles, in pauses, in intervals that seemed long but were, always moving quietly toward change. The long waiting of the Dark Ages was not wasted time. It was the soil from which new worlds would grow. Out of silence came songs, out of ruin came rebuilding, out of patience came renewal. And as you drift further into rest, let that patience hold you too. There is no need to rush, no need to grasp. Like the seeds beneath the soil, like the words slowly copied by monks, like the warmth that always returns after winter, everything unfolds when the moment is right. Waiting is not emptiness, it is preparation. So let yourself rest in the long waiting. Feel it as comfort, as safety, as assurance that time itself is working on your behalf. The Dark Ages endured for centuries, and still they ended, and the world moved forward again. Your night is shorter, gentler, and it too will carry you toward morning. Trust the waiting, trust the silence, trust the slow rhythm that has always sustained life. Block 1-5, the dawn beyond the darkness. There comes a moment in every long night when the horizon begins to change. At first it is almost invisible, a softening of the blackness, a faint shift in tone that the eye barely notices. But then the air feels different, the stillness lighter, the silence softer, and slowly, gently, without rush, the first light arrives. For centuries, the world lived in what we now call the Dark Ages, a time of silence, of patience, of slow rebuilding. Yet even then, dawn was preparing itself beyond the horizon. Tonight, as you rest, let yourself feel that same promise, that after the quiet, after the shadows, light always returns. Picture the monasteries where monks copied their books. For generations, those words sat waiting on shelves, unread by many. And yet, when the time was right, when the centuries had turned, those same words would ignite minds, would inspire artists, would awaken new sciences, would spark the age we now call Renaissance. What seemed like fragments held in shadows were, in truth, seeds sleeping in the soil, waiting for spring. The dawn was always there, even when the night was deepest. Imagine to the small villages, the humble fields, the quiet work of families who survived not with grandeur, but with persistence. They planted, harvested, mended, built, told stories, raised children. Their names are forgotten, but their patience carried humanity across the long night. Each loaf of bread baked, each hut repaired, each song sung in the dark was part of the dawn that would follow. The Dark Ages were not only about silence, they were about preparing for light, even when it was unseen. The legends told by firelight also waited. They shifted, grew, changed, but they endured. And when the dawn came, those legends blossomed into epics, into poems, into songs that still echo in our own time. They remind us that stories, even whispered in huts and halls, can outlast centuries, can carry memory through the deepest shadows until the day returns. As you breathe slowly now, feel that rhythm in your own body. Darkness never lasts forever. Night yields to morning, silence yields to song, patience yields to growth. The people of the Dark Ages lived in long waiting, but they were never abandoned, and neither are you. Whatever silence you feel, whatever shadows surround you, there is always light beyond them, moving closer, preparing to rise. The dawn beyond the Dark Ages did not erase what came before. It carried it forward, transformed it, gave it new life. In the same way, your rest tonight does not erase your day. It gathers it, heals it, prepares you for what comes next. Sleep itself is a kind of dawn hidden in the night, a promise that life continues, renewed, steady, hopeful. Now, as this long journey through the Dark Ages comes to its close, let yourself rest in the assurance that history teaches. No darkness is endless, no silence is empty, no night is eternal. The morning always returns, and with it, light, warmth, and renewal. And here, in this quiet moment, before you drift fully into sleep, I invite you softly to share in the continuation of these journeys. If these gentle stories bring you calm, if the long unfolding of history helps you find peace as you close your eyes, consider leaving a quiet mark of your presence like a pebble placed on a path for others to see. You might gently like this video, as one might light a candle in the dark. You might share it, so that others searching for rest may find it too. You might leave a comment, as one leaves a story at the fire for others to hear. And you might subscribe, so that you can return again to walk with us through other forgotten times, other hidden histories, other journeys that carry you softly toward sleep. Do this not with urgency, but with ease, as one more step in the rhythm of rest. Now let the silence cradle you, let the shadows soothe you, let the thought of dawn comfort you. The Dark Ages have ended, the night itself is yielding, and all that remains is peace. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow yourself to drift, carried gently by the tide of time, into the dawn that waits beyond the darkness.